Welcome to the Wake Tech STEM podcast, where we highlight diversity in STEM as well as explore the multitude of career options within STEM. This podcast is a production of the Math and Science Division. Please join me as we explore STEM through the eyes of our speaker.
Welcome back, fellow Wake Tech students and staff and faculty. I'm Marcia McCoy, Associate Professor of Communication here in North Campus, and I am excited to be a part of another STEM podcast. And joining me today is postdoctoral scholar Christine Daniels from the Duke Human Vaccine Institute. I am so excited to have you along, Dr. Daniels. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, Miss McCoy. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad. And all of us are wondering how STEM is actually taking place in the real world, not just theory, but actual application. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Great question. Thanks for asking. So I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, but I came to Duke for my PhD, which I did in cancer biology, and currently I'm working on my postdoc. What that means is that I've completed my doctoral training, and now I'm getting additional training in a specific field. So similar to how MDs will pursue residencies after completing medical school, PhDs often complete postdocs after graduate school, where they're able to specialize in specific areas or switch areas completely. So for my postdoc, I chose to switch areas from cancer to HIV vaccine development. And so now yeah, it was a big leap, but I think it's really cool. My research focuses on trying to understand the barriers to people developing neutralizing antibodies against HIV, or why they can't fight the virus. And so using that information, I designed protein-based nanoparticles to use as HIV vaccine candidates. And I test these vaccine candidates in animals and then use that information about how effective they were or why they weren't effective to help design new ones. And so it's an iterative process of vaccine design, but that's ultimately what I work on now.
That is awesome. And you know what? I know that with every level of achievement, there had to be some hurdles that you had to jump, some obstacles you had to face. Can you share any of those with us?
Oh, I have a list, but well, I mean, one, being a Black woman in science, I mean, that's just not something. I don't see a lot of people that look like me, that have natural hair or Black or younger in this field at this level. So I would say access is a huge hurdle. I personally didn't know that the option to be a scientist was something that I can do when I was growing up. I didn't know any scientists personally. Any scientist I could like think of was an old white man, and so it just wasn't something that I saw myself in. Also, just getting support through the process. So being one of the, having to pioneer this path for myself, and then finding people who can support me. My family was very supportive in terms of like, you can do it, we're all counting on you. But in terms of relatability, like they didn't really understand what I was going through. So sometimes saying you can do it when you don't feel like you're doing so well isn't enough to kind of pull you through. So finding that support institutionally and emotionally was really hard. I would say the timeline, if you go the PhD route, is another hurdle just because it's so long. Undergrad is 4 years, all the other professional schools are like 4 years, 2 years, but a PhD doesn't have like a specified time. I know people who've been here for 7 years. It's a long time, and it's really hard to be in that place when you see your peers that didn't choose this route that are going on and starting careers and families, and you're still studying, and you're still, like a student. I feel like I've been a student for my whole life. So the timeline was really hard, and imposter syndrome. I think everyone in every field can probably relate to some degree of imposter syndrome, but just always feeling like, one day you're going to get exposed, or that you don't know enough, or that you don't really deserve to be here. And so that's a hurdle within yourself that I know I've grappled with and still to this day grapple with. And so those are some of the things off the top of my head I can think of that have really impacted my journey.
Well, that is very powerful. And now that you mentioned even imposter syndrome, I know I had another podcast where that was mentioned and brought up, but it makes me think about the actual failures. And if you even see the word failure itself as failure, or rather another hurdle to learn from or a new piece of information, but with the idea of grit, resiliency, perseverance, all of these things in this STEM field, Were there any failures that you experienced that you had to really fight to overcome?
So failure is a very familiar word. If you're going to pursue science, you will get very accustomed to experiencing failure because most of science is failure.
Mm.
But in terms of feeling like a failure, I would say graduate school. So I didn't have a straightforward graduate school journey. I actually had to start over 3 times
Oh, wow.
during graduate. Yeah, so that was one of those things where each time you're not successful, it's very easy to internalize it and think that there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or why am I not performing as well as my peers or this person or that person. And so that was a really hard thing to experience, especially for so long. I mean, my PhD took about 6 years. And so to have to start over and to feel like I'm never going to finish or I can't do this was really hard. But I pushed through it and I had to keep reorienting myself and finding ways to stay motivated. And I actually finished around the same time as my peers. I'm in the same position as a lot of my peers. Some of my peers I've actually surpassed in terms of career progression. So I say all that to say that a PhD is a hard choice. It's a hard path. Any graduate career or college career is hard. And so there's a degree of that you take on when you apply and when you start doing it. But don't let that deter you if your journey doesn't look like somebody else's. Don't be afraid to start over because you lose interest or you find something that you like more, or your timeline gets thrown off. None of that matters in the long run. I had a different timeline, I had a different path, but I'm still in the same place I wanted to be. And so I encourage anyone who's thinking of pursuing something, it's not too late. You can always pivot. I've pivoted so many times, it's not even funny.
One of the things we really want to focus on in these podcasts is highlighting diversity in the STEM field. Have you faced any obstacles in your career being a person of color? And if so, how did you overcome them? Or just what is a challenge you may be facing right now?
I think being a person of color in academia is the challenge, and it's not something that I think that I've overcome. I think my attitude has evolved and how I deal with it. But I mean, there's definitely going to be the times where the assumption is that you're not supposed to be here, or that you're a lower position than you are, or people don't give you credit for your ideas. I mean, that's a day in the life. But how I deal with that is that, one, I don't think of it as a reflection of me, and two, I do as much work as possible in my spare time to try to change the climate for other people. So I do a lot. I'm involved in a lot of committees that are geared towards making the environment more inclusive and helping people become more aware of how to interact with people who come from different backgrounds or identify differently than them. So I serve on diversity committees. I also try to mentor so that we can increase the number of people that look like me or differently than me in this space. So it's not such a homogenous community, but you have people from all different backgrounds and ethnicities represented. And so I think that helps me feel better to like know that I'm encouraging other people to see themselves in this space and to get into academia.
What is your favorite song or motivational quote? What keeps you going day to day? Sometimes assignment or vaccine to vaccine. What keeps you motivated?
I have a couple of quotes. One is, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And that just speaks to the power of the mouth and the tongue, the mind and the mouth, speaking words into existence. The other one is, everything is figure outable. So you don't go to graduate school or college because you know all the answers, but it doesn't mean you don't have the capacity to get them. Um,
Hold
and
on.
it's
I think you just invented a word, and I want to make sure it's heard on the audio. I want to make sure this was heard on the. You said figure outable.
I did. I got it from one of Oprah's podcasts. She had a speaker, and that was her talk, and it just helped me a lot with imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't know all the answers, but I can figure them out. I can find a way. I
That's
can
all
Google.
right. We're inventing everything every day. I say we invent a few new words just to make sure it's known. Definitely figure outable.
It's a great podcast episode. You should look it up.
That's awesome, and I definitely will. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels, for joining us for another Wake Tech STEM podcast. And for everyone else out here listening, we hope you will consider all of these words and consider your next step in your next venture. Until next time, stay awake.